Welcome, everyone, to our final session of the day on today's Pathway to 17 Summit. I'm delighted to be with you all for this last session, and also with you all on this global virtual event that brings together thought leaders, problem solvers, innovators, industry experts, and practitioners working to solve the world's greatest challenges. Our focus today, for those of you that have been with us, you'll know it's on innovative and inclusive fintech. And this stream today has been cultivated by us at the Alliance of Digital Finance and Fintech Associations. We want to welcome you to the last session of the day. We've talked a lot through the earlier parts of the conversations we've had today around innovation, around, sort of what we're doing to grow, accelerate, and the fintech in particular. But every single session has also touched on this other thing, that there are consumers that we need to consider, and we need to think about strategies to safeguard these consumers while all this innovation is happening. The surge in digital financial transactions and rapid technological advancements have led to more sophisticated fraud, exposing consumers, particularly the most vulnerable, to heightened risks. So in this session, we're going to delve into strategies for reducing these risks and examine how industry collaboration can create stronger safeguards to protect consumers. I'm delighted to be joined today by some wonderful expert panelists. Let me introduce them to you before we start kicking off the conversation. So firstly, we have Brooke Kingsland, who is the Partnerships and Engagement Lead for Digital Consumers' Rights at Consumers International, who are the global membership body for consumer advocacy groups. Brooke seeks to amplify the lived experiences and advocacy work of members by engaging diverse stakeholders from the government, academia, civil society, and business. She's focused on the areas of digital rights and digital finance and oversees the strategic activation of partners committed to building with and for consumers. Welcome, Brooke. We also have Eric Duflos. Eric leads the CGAP's consumer protection and responsible finance work, ensuring that financial services have positive outcomes for consumers. Eric has over 28 years. I probably shouldn't say that because I'm giving away your age there, Eric, but he has many years of experience in advancing financial inclusion and economic development with a strong focus on policy and development. In his most recent work, he proposes a new way to think about consumer protection with a responsible digital finance ecosystem approach. Next, we have Tavonga Muchuchuti, and he is the Managing Director of Xavier Africa, an AI development agency that serves blue chip companies and government entities across Botswana, South Africa, Kenya, and Zimbabwe. He also advises several different digital transformation strategies across the SADC region. Tavonga is also incredibly a busy person and fits in somehow to be president of the Fintech Association of Botswana, which contributes to the development of policy, technological infrastructure, and funding mechanisms for the fintech ecosystem. Lastly, let me introduce you to William Blackmon, the Associate Director for Consumer Protection on Innovations for Poverty Action's Financial Inclusion Programme. William oversees a portfolio of research studies, including studies managed through IPA's Consumer Protection Research Initiative, which focuses on measuring consumer risks associated with digital financial services and testing solutions to address these risks. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah Corley, and I'm CEO of the Alliance of Digital Finance and Fintech Associations. And we are a global hub uniting regional and national associations to foster knowledge exchange, create synergies, and impact the digital finance and fintech sector, trying to enable the development of inclusive and responsible digital financial services and products. So as you can see, there's a lot of experience and passion on this panel, which I think is really important as well to address consumer protection. When we talk today, there's a lot of things that we can talk about in consumer protection. However, we've chosen to specifically focus in a little bit more to talk in particular about scams. So let me start with this question. Eric, this one is coming to you. When I talk about consumer risks, even me, when I do panel conversations or I have conversations, even keynotes I've given, it is CGAP's research on the nature of consumer risks in DFS and the scale of risks and how they're growing that I often refer back to because I found that piece of work really insightful. So Eric, can you give us an overview of sort of what these risks are and particularly those that are related to scams?
Thank you very much, Sarah. Well, we're all here in this virtual room today because we all care about inclusive finance, but also inclusive and responsible financial services. And we all know that technology is a fantastic enabler for this to happen, but it's also a double-edged sword. So CGAP, has been working for many years as a think tank on financial inclusion, on solutions to unleash financial inclusion using technology. But we also have done a lot of research, as you've just mentioned, about some of the risks that this, digital finance in particular, is creating for consumers. So in 2022, indeed, we came up with a paper that looked at the global trends in terms of consumer risks related with digital finance, and we organized all the data we could find into 6 categories of risks. So the first one is fraud. The second one is data misuse. The third one is lack of transparency. The fourth is inadequate redress mechanisms. And we also found 2 cross-cutting risks that are agent-related risks. Those mom and pop shops that money issuers use to provide their services in different areas, or banks. And we also have network downtime, which is another cross-cutting risk. So to come back on your question, indeed, the diversity of types of frauds has evolved a lot with digital finance. And the first big finding is that in terms of the evolution of risks, there are more risks that are coming with technology, because it enables fraudsters and other people to do more things than before. But one thing we have found in terms of data is that frauds and data misuse are the 2 risks that are really growing fast globally. We have enough evidence to show that. And when it comes to frauds, I would say that we still see a lot of SIM swap frauds, but also a very fast increase in terms of mobile app frauds. A lot of social engineering going on, and obviously this is going to be even more emphasized and increased, with AI, which enables even more sort of, ID theft and social engineering. So this is definitely an area that everybody globally is currently looking at, frauds, a good topic to discuss, and obviously a good area for a lot of the associations to work together on this. But let's not forget that there are also all these other risks that I have mentioned. I also wanted to highlight some of the work we've done at the country level that is also, quite interesting, because, my colleague from IPA can also talk about this, but they have also done a lot of these national surveys. We've done 3 national surveys in Francophone Africa, and we found on digital finance risks. And we found that in these 3 countries, between, let's say, 70 and 90% of people were experiencing risks such as, scams, frauds, and other risks. And almost, in some countries, 40% of people were losing money out of these risks. So, we're talking about very significant issues here when you have sometimes close to 90% of the population using digital finance who are facing risks, and close to 40% losing money. So obviously, all this work has provided a sort of alarm bell, so to speak, for the sector to pay more attention to this. So I'm glad we're going to be discussing about this today.
Thank you very much, Eric. That's some very interesting and scary statistics there. I mean, 90%, in fact, probably it's almost close to 100%. I think, even me, and I'm sure as a panelist, we've all maybe not had the unpleasantness of falling victim to, but certainly have, received either texts or phone calls that are trying to scam us out of our money. And 40% obviously is way, way too high. And we know that perhaps due to issues of redress mechanism challenges, many of those people will not get any of that money back either. So I think it's really important that we understand a lot more about what is happening. And William, I'm going to come to you because you've done some amazing research at IPA to try and understand what consumers are experiencing, what are the common frauds and scams that are happening in the market. So perhaps you can share some key highlights with us.
Wonderful, thank you, and thanks again for the opportunity to be part of this really exciting panel. I'm going to echo a lot of what Eric has already said. As Eric mentioned, just like CGAP, IPA has run a number of surveys of consumers to try to understand the extent of a number of sort of consumer risks, including fraud and scams, and we found similarly high concerning rates of exposure to a range of risks, including risks around fraud and scams. So we've run surveys to date in Kenya, Uganda, Nigeria, and Bangladesh. These was initially run in 2020 and 2021. We have a second round of results from Nigeria that are going to be published soon, later this year, likely. And then we're also expanding to run surveys across 10 countries in the next few years. So you can look forward to more on that. I think Caitlin will be sharing a link in the chat that provides information about these surveys. So what we found is exposure to fraud is quite common. It's typically in the top 1, 2, or 3 in terms of the types of fraud most commonly experienced by consumers. And in Bangladesh, we see 29% of consumers have recently experienced a fraud attempt. In Uganda, it's 33%. In Kenya, it's 56%, more than half of consumers. In Nigeria, it was 26%. It improved slightly. The last round shows 23%, so a slight improvement. And the types of of scams are similar to what Eric has said. Typically these will come through as SMS or phone call scams, aided by technology, so you can automate this to a certain extent. We also see some social media scams, but in the markets that we were looking at, really SMS and phone calls were the most likely channels through which these are perpetrated. The typologies really vary. We see SIM swap scams have been an issue for a long time. We see people calling and asking to reverse a transaction that in fact never really occurred. We see lots of these social engineering types of scams where a friend or family member has an emergency that's of course just made up. We also see that more than half in most of our markets, half or slightly more of scam attempts, that the fraudster was posing as a financial service provider representative. So this is quite common, where they'll pose as a representative of a bank or a mobile money operator and try to access your account information, your PIN or your password, and then subsequently will extract money through that route. We also touching on something that Eric mentioned around fintech applications, smartphone applications. This is something that we've looked at as well. We ran a study along with academic researchers to collect and review metadata from around 1,000 fintech applications that were available across India, Nigeria, Philippines, and the United States, to try to understand what's out there in terms of the quality of these purported fintech applications. We found that based on this analysis, around 5% overall were likely fraudulent. So these are fintech applications that purport to offer digital credit, but then they charge an upfront fee, and in the end you don't access any credit. And then also very concerningly, about 2/3, more than half, 2/3 of these 5,000 applications that were available were categorized as predatory. So this is not explicitly fraud, but it's also not really legitimate. It's kind of a gray area where they're charging really exorbitant fees and charges. Maybe they do offer a product, but it's if it's not fraud, it's fraud adjacent. And so we find that this is a really significant concern. I'll just very briefly, I think redress is an important related component here that I think we'll talk about soon. But if you do fall prey to fraud, you need to have an easy and accessible way to reach out to your financial service provider to get the issue addressed. And we find that that's quite uncommon. It's unlikely for consumers to reach out to their financial service provider to get their issue addressed, and it's kind of reasonable that they're not reporting these issues to their provider, because even if they do, it's unlikely that they're going to get their money back. So I'll leave it at there.
But really, I mean, painting a really urgent picture that actually we as an industry really do need to act on so many levels on this, to try and prevent people from becoming victims. Or it may not always be possible. I myself was a victim. I have no idea still how, a couple of weeks ago, but all the money that was taken is now in my bank account. So the redress aspect of that worked, but that is not the case, as we know, for many. Brooke, I know Consumers International has done a lot of research, so I mean, it'd be great to hear if you concur with what you've heard from Eric and William, but also perhaps to give us a flavour about how this is impacting on consumers, particularly vulnerable consumers.
All right, thank you so much, Sarah, and all for being here today. Consumers International has amplified the lived consumer experience of this issue in our research and advocacy, and you can read more about our approach in the link being shared in the chat. What Eric and William have shared definitely resonates, especially in terms of the pervasiveness of the issue, the typology we see, and the need for redress, especially amid underreporting. I'll share a little bit about some research and the lived experiences that we know of. Our research last year on the consumer experience in digital finance, with support from CGAP, found that close to 75% of our members and LMICs reported fraud-related risks as major challenges to consumers. Fake online shopping websites and phishing scams were reported the top two most prominent fraud risks. And in our multi-stakeholder work, we do take care in differentiating between fraud and scams, where online scams are a type of fraud that results from this kind of authorized activity that we're talking about through manipulative technology and social-based engineering. This is important to differentiate because the role of the consumer unknowingly plays in the scam, where the consumer has been deeply misled and directly involved in the outcome, and that can have particularly devastating consequences. So Sarah, you asked about impact. Scams have the potential to cause great harm to consumers in several ways. Again, with the caveat that the issue is underreported. Most obvious is the financial loss, which can be staggering, potentially life-changing. In addition to financial losses, consumers who are affected by scams, because of the nature of them that I described earlier and that we've been talking about, these can be psychological, mental, emotional effects, exhibiting turmoil, shame, loss of confidence, and other forms of distress, which certainly drives underreporting, as well as perceived lack of efficacy and redress. These outcomes overall degrade consumer trust in digital marketplaces, and the other parts of the scams ecosystem that we've talked about, social media platforms and other brands, affecting future online behavior and interactions with the individual consumer themselves and also potentially their community. And thank you so much for the point around particular vulnerabilities. We know that consumer vulnerability matters. Our emerging research shows that consumers experience digital finance differently depending on their level of vulnerability, where our definition of that blends traditional, more category-based attributes with circumstantial considerations. We're seeing that 52% of highly vulnerable consumers reported falling victim to scams versus 19% low vulnerable. And with every increase in one's vulnerability score, the score for negative financial outcomes increases too. We can map this against financial resilience, things like making payments for everyday expenses and saving for the future, and really see the picture that paints. From some examples from our members, this resonates with what you said, Sarah, in terms of who we think about may be susceptible. Choice in Australia shared an example of how even the savviest of consumers can fall prey to scams. One of their former policy advisors was impacted. So again, a real question of who we think is susceptible and what vulnerability means in this context. Consumer Reports in the US has also shared even being exposed to a scam in some way, even if you identify it, detect it, disrupt it, are able to recover losses, have their address, that is your right, it's still emotionally impactful just to have experienced it and to have that trust shaken. And then Which in the UK is also sharing more about deep fakes, AI rendered celebrities and their role in scams. And we also talked about this earlier, that potential that has to disrupt the scams landscape now and moving forward, where we see that the experience of a scam may change, but broadly the types of impacts remain.
I think many of us got into the world of digital finance because we felt like it was going to be a game changer to improve people's lives, to give them access to be able to save and access credit and insurance, to empower them, hopefully out of poverty. Yet it feels quite devastating to think that scammers are out there targeting those very people, deliberately almost, because they know they are going to perhaps be the most vulnerable and are more likely to fall victim. I think double-edged sword was a really good word there that you used, Eric, and I think it needs to stay with us. So thank you, Eric, William, and Brooke. You've given us a really great picture. I wanted to bring Tavonga in here in this conversation because Tavonga, as president of Botswana Fintech Association, you are the industry voice in Botswana. You're leading the industry, and we'd really love to hear from you. How seriously, are you taking, as an association and your members taking this issue? What are you seeing happening in your landscape in Botswana?
Yeah, no, definitely. And thank you once again, Sarah, for looping us in. I think one of the key things that we've realized in the last couple of years is, in order for the fintech industry to grow, we need to make sure that consumers are protected and that they feel that they can be able to undertake and take transactions without fearing that their money might disappear, or that they might not get their money back on counterparty transactions. As a result, there's been a big investment as the fintech community to then say, because there's this very big problem that's going on, and obviously the scams we have mentioned on this panel, to say, what are some of these scams looking like? Look, globally, you're going to find that they're pretty much the same and they're pretty much similar. And they do have similar characteristics. And the goal for us has been to say, look, for our industry to grow, we need to make sure that we invest heavily as a collective to be able to do this. And so the first thing that we had to do earlier on in the year, this year, was we had to bring in all the key parties and all the key stakeholders in the industry, and to say, look, we've got this very big problem. In Botswana, it's about a 500 million pula problem. About 500 million pula was being taken by these scammers. And we brought in all the key stakeholders. So these are guys from banks, insurance companies, traditional fintechs, regulators, and we sat down in what we call a power breakfast, where we set them into different groups to say, look, let's look at what are some of the leakages that are leading to these scams happening, and then let's look at how we can be able to close them. So the first part of that was to define what are those scams and what do they look like, and how exactly are these operators operating. And we took this from a data-informed perspective to say, here's what they look like, here's what they are. And from there, we then wanted to define to say, how exactly do we deal with this? The first one was, of course, through looking at internal controls as an industry. So the first thing was to say a lot of fraud goes on for a very long time because the internal controls in the banks, the internal controls in the fintechs are not capable of identifying patterns in this early on. And so we defined what some of those technologies would be that would help to be able to identify this, as well as created a framework, an industry-wide framework, which we are now all going to be adopting as an industry for what the golden standard for internal controls should be for payments, as well as for lending businesses. From there, we then looked at the technologies to say, what are some of the technologies that are being used all across the world for us to be able to fortify these internal systems. We brought these on as well, and they were able to actually help us to figure out and look at how we can be able to protect consumers further. Then the next layer was, look, we can fortify all these things as much as we want, but the consumer, ultimately is the one that is being manipulated by these bad actors. You look at the investment scams, you look at the phishing scams, the consumer as the last point of defense. So we then worked on a project that actually were funded by the DFA called the Botswana Scam Radar. And the idea of the Botswana Scam Radar was really for us to have one central source of truth where all the key scams across the ecosystem would sit. And two, a place whereby one could be able to get an education in terms of how these different scams work, whilst on the other hand, also allowing us to be able to have a record where someone can report something they suspect is a scam. So the idea there would be then to have the regulators on the other side, as well as the policing, so that we can be able to see what exactly and have visibility on what's going on in the ecosystem. That way we could be able to deal with it very quickly. And we coupled that now with consumer education. And the idea of consumer education really was to say, look, how do the scammers lure these people? They don't lure them with long 50-minute videos about scams and the diagrams. They lure them with messaging that really speaks to them and that works for them. So really, we're currently working on an influencer marketing model. Working with influencers on the ground for us to be able to have engaging videos about how some of these scams work. With some of them having some comedic relief. With some of them having some ways to really reach people and to show them how exactly these guys are doing this work. So the idea was, if we try to solve only from one perspective, we won't be able to solve this, because we've tried to educate the people, by the way. And we did say that this can happen to some of the most sophisticated people. But to deal with this particular problem, the idea has been, let's take a comprehensive approach. Let's go internal controls, let's go technologies, let's go engagement across the ecosystem. And then also, on top of that, let's also make sure that we put in place education that resonates and works for the clientele that we're dealing with. So we've taken it very seriously as industry, and are always looking to partner to continue to work on more and more approaches to being able to curb this. Because as you can know, the scammers, they evolve their approaches as well. They continue to think of different ways and different ways of operating. And we need to be able to be agile, just like they are, in order for us to be able to solve this problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tavonga. And it's so heartening to hear industry, taking responsibility and finding different strategies and working together collaboratively, which I think is really important as well. Whatever is affecting one fintech or one financial service provider is likely to be affecting all of them. So coming together to share that learning and collaboratively try and fight back it seems to be a really good approach. And Eric, you've been researching ways in which we can try and have greater consumer protection, and how as an industry and an ecosystem we can work collaboratively together. So I'm sure Tavonga's response was music to your ears, but if you can please tell us more about your new paper that you've written.
Thank you very much indeed. Tavonga's was music to my ears, as you said. So we clearly have a growing issue here. I think it's pretty clear from all what everybody has been saying so far. So now, how can we really better manage consumer risks? How can we reduce them? How can we identify them? How can we prevent them? So we believe at CGAP, and that's what I'm describing in the paper, that we need to really step up financial consumer protection, but with what we call an ecosystem approach. So this is, the idea is to be more ambitious. And in the paper we describe how we can do that as an ecosystem at the national level. So when I talk about ecosystem, I'm talking about, of course, the consumer representatives, like Brooke has discussed. We're talking about the providers of digital finance that Tavonga has illustrated with his example. But we're also talking a lot about different types of authorities. So it's not just the financial sector authority that needs to be involved in protecting consumers in the financial sector. It's a whole range of authorities. It's the data protection authority. It's, the telecom regulator. The police needs to be involved. It's a whole range of actors. And then the market facilitators also need to be there, whether it's the credit bureau, the academics, the IPAs of this world need to provide the data, because you need data to understand what the issues are on the ground. So we believe at CGAP that only by taking this ecosystem approach we can succeed. And Tavonga's example of how they handle the scams with this ecosystem approach is exactly what we're talking. But instead of being reactive, we want it to be proactive. So we need to set this up before the issues appear in the system. So that's what we're trying to push. And we're piloting this in a few countries. We've started to work on this, concept in the Wemu region. And just to give you an example, in Côte d'Ivoire, we've worked with the authorities and all the ecosystem for the last 2-3 years after we had this pretty, terrible, figure that I mentioned earlier. And we have actually, worked with them, having the data available, but also working with all and manage in 2 or 3 years to see a decrease in frauds. So it's possible to make progress with this ecosystem approach. And finally, I'll just say a few words about the role of associations, because they play a very important role. And we've done some research also on this, and someone can share the blog in the chat. And we found that a significant number of associations are actually playing a very important role in supporting more responsible digital finance. For example, in terms of enhancing more customer centricity with consumer awareness campaigns from the fintech or digital finance associations, improving the capability also of their members, and then fostering collaboration. So we have I think 10 or more types of activities that these associations can play that we have found. And for example, we found that the Association of Fintech Indonesia has promoted consumer awareness with the anti-fake fintech campaign. To give you another example, the Fintech Alliance in the Philippines is working on capacity buildings for its member on data protection and privacy. We have the Ukrainian Association of Fintech and Innovation Companies that is providing online complaints handling platform, for consumers. So there are lots of examples of amazing activities that fintech associations and digital finance associations and banking associations that also do digital finance can play. So huge role for you, Sarah, and your members, of course.
And it's a huge role, I think, that we're all very passionate about as members of the Alliance. We've had so many conversations about this and really want to make a difference. So I'm really excited to hear that all these examples of what are happening, and having Tavonga explaining what they are doing, I think really shows that the passion and interest and dedication to addressing this issue, what we really have, and I'm excited to do even more next year. So let's go to William, because I have a really interesting question for you. So digitization, if I can say the word, that is what's bringing us all these new risks. But actually, can we use technology to fight against, some of these risks? How does IPA supporting the industry as well to tackle these issues?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a super important question. So let me talk a little bit about what IPA does in terms of our research approach, and then I'll talk about a couple of quick tech solutions that we think are promising. So as a research organization, our primary role that we see ourselves in this quest to mitigate fraud is to help industry players, be it financial service providers, regulators, civil society, test out potential solutions that we've been discussing today, to see if they work. Because the unfortunate news is many well-intentioned tools that we're developing are going to have limited impacts. And so we just have to keep trying and testing to see what works and what doesn't. So we work with industry players to run often randomized control trials to test out whether an intervention works. So just one quick example, consumer education is of course one tool that we can use here. We've run 3 randomized control trial tests to see if various education campaigns work. The short answer is 2 of them didn't work and 1 of them did. Why? It comes down to the design. It comes down to making the education interesting and engaging. To Tavonga's point, it has to be fun. It has to be not sort of pushing something down people's throat. And so testing was helpful, because now we know let's follow the path of the successful one, which we did in Uganda, and not invest funds in something that doesn't work in the other places where we tested this out. In terms of tech solution, tech focused solutions, 2 ideas to throw out there. First off, can we take advantage of complaints data, which we've talked about before, to try to understand in real time the types of fraud typologies and the ever-changing landscape in real time. So can you sort of use natural language processing to ingest and digest information that's coming in through complaints to sort of come up with a real-time understanding of the types of fraud that are being perpetrated in the market, and then even potentially use AI, large language models, to take that information and develop sort of tailored education, information campaigns that addresses not what fraudsters used to do, but what they're currently doing now. A last example, for many years, legacy providers, Visa and MasterCard, have been using machine learning to ingest information, transaction information, and using machine learning to identify trends or sort of patterns of transactions that appear to be likely fraudulent, and then declining those transactions automatically, so that a consumer, even if they're not aware that they're about to make a fraudulent transaction or lose money through a fraudulent transaction, that they're prevented from losing money because the transaction is declined. We don't see this happening as much today in instant payment systems in emerging markets, but there's no real reason why that shouldn't come. So hopefully that's in our near future.
Thanks, William. It's great to know that there's research being done that actually is addressing what is working and what isn't, because that gives great information to people like Tavonga and those running the associations to help them refine their strategies and approach, and how they're going to tackle things, and also what maybe other industries around the world have done, so that we can advocate for the implementation of that in the countries the association sits in. So it's incredibly valuable work, and we're really grateful for all the research and how you're helping shape the industry with identifying these best practices. Just a quick shout out, we've got about 15 minutes left, so if anyone in the audience has any questions, now's your time. Please post them in the chat so that we can answer them before our session finishes. Coming over to you, Brooke. Consumers International, of course, in its name, it's telling us that you are doing many things to protect the consumer across the globe. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about one or two of your initiatives.
Sure. As always, we're supporting our members in country, local, and also regional efforts, as well as mobilizing for change at a global scale. In country, there are many examples we can point to at our members leading the way here. The Consumer Council of Fiji is leveraging data collected in complaints, handling, and dispute resolution to make improvements to existing policy. So they've analyzed over 900 complaints related to online scams, leading the local government to establish a multi-stakeholder anti-scam task force to address this type of financial fraud. Globally, over the past year, our efforts have coalesced into the Consumer Coalition to Stop Scams, what we call the CCSS. And this again echoes the importance of the ecosystem approach that we've been all discussing today. At our global congress, held every 4 years, last December was the last one in Nairobi, we published our statement to stop scams, which was endorsed by 27 members. And then early in the new year, we decided to move forward with this coalition, which now includes over 30 members. And what we're doing is we translated our statement into recommendations of 9 scam policy resilience initiatives, or SPRIs. And these are 9 different initiatives across preventative measures, detection and disruption strategies, and appropriate response and support. So trying to look at the full kind of life cycle of a scam. Consumer education is one of them. But important to emphasize, the responsibility cannot be on the consumer alone. So that education piece is just one aspect of our approach to the issue. These initiatives comprise a strategic set of actions that, again, ecosystem stakeholders can take to minimize the impact of scams on consumers, and echo kind of some of the themes that we've all been talking about. So I know there's kind of multi-pronged approaches. What we'll be doing into 2025 is ranking each of these SPRIs according to the potential for impact, the need for maturity, perceived, of course, in the current ability to drive change. We'll advance the top 3 into solution building working groups, and the goal is to kind of further co-create what best practice looks like. Again, sort of a theme we've talked about as well. We'll be sharing updates and progressing, hopefully, to further commitments from industry in particular, and sharing a report as well in 2025. The CCSS is now open to businesses and other groups in Consumers International's Change Network, to really get at that multi-stakeholder, cross-sector approach, which we think is really key to addressing this issue. And we're excited that the Alliance of Digital Finance and Fintech Associations has that observer status with the CCSS. So this will be a great way to keep building bridges, help connect the conversations that we're all having in different spaces at different levels, to be able to move forward. And that reflects a big part of our consumer advocacy toolkit.
And we're delighted to be part of that as well. And I think, we can clearly see that lots of work is happening, and different people are leading different things, but ultimately they're all trying to achieve the same thing. And actually, by collaborating together, sharing best practices, research insights, what is working, what isn't working, it helps all of us to really continue to shape and influence, how we are able to protect our consumers from this harm.
Absolutely.
I actually had another question for Tavonga, but a really great one has come in on the chat. So I'm going to use the audience's question instead of mine. It's always good to hear from the audience. So we have a question from Abdisalam. Tavonga, what role do industry associations and regulatory authorities play in addressing financial fraud and scams? And his was in emerging East African markets, but I think we'll just take that in emerging markets in Africa. So Tavonga, will come to you first, and then if anyone else has any, I think to add to that, we'll come to you. So Tavonga.
Definitely. And thank you for the question. I think there's 2 parts of that. So the good thing is that I'm currently involved in the board for the Africa FinTech Network. So we do have some interesting visibility coming from East Africa, where this is the hub of fintech, if we can say, and this is where we've drawn some very good insights around how these scams work, how these scams are put together, and how they're currently running. And so when we look at the relationship and the work that the industry associations and the regulatory authorities play, this has to be a very symbiotic relationship, really, in order to be able to resolve for this. Because one thing that the industry associations can do is they have the ability to have the data on the ground of what exactly it is that is going on in, if I can say, in near real time, as their members are able to feed this data as it's coming in. So they're able to be agile enough to be able to know what sort of threats are around. And unfortunately, because they're not regulatory, a lot of the times what they can only do is to offer recommendations around how regulators can be able to move and action these. So now the relationship and the work that the regulators have to do is, one, in terms of helping the industry associations to hold our members accountable, to one, holding the highest levels of internal controls, as well as in ensuring that when investigations need to happen into potential scams, they can be able to take a look at them very quickly, especially, Ponzi schemes. Ponzi schemes and investment schemes, those you need to be able to get them very quickly before the money has run out and, people have run away with the money already. So because of that, the speed from the industry association, as well as the data, can allow them to then feed now to the regulator, who now then in turn needs to be able to hold accountable our members who are handling the money. And 2, for them to be able to make sure that they have the regulations that are available to make sure that they hold those bad actors to account and deal to them adequately and quickly.
Thank you so much, Tavonga. Brooke, I know that obviously, your associations too will have a role to play. I'm not sure if you also have a great answer to that question.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to weigh in. I think, again, it's looking across kind of what we're seeing individually for each of our members in country, but then taking that message and understanding what kind of the shared themes are, the shared actions that would drive the most change, and then getting it in front of the right audience to drive change. So kind of a similar network approach where we can learn from what everyone is doing, but take it up to kind of the highest level to drive action and change.
Eric or William, anything else to add to that?
Just if I can on the regulator's role, because we see the regulator and the supervisors in the financial sector as the anchor in this ecosystem. They are the ones who determine the rules in terms of financial consumer protection. Then they have to supervise the market, with market monitoring, using phone surveys, technology, etc. And then they enforce the rules. So they have an absolutely critical role. And we always say that they are the anchor of the ecosystem. So I think we need to, we cannot put all the responsibility on the consumers, as Brooke said earlier. The regulator, the supervisors have a critical role to play. So I'll just finish here.
Thank you. Anything from you, William?
No, I agree with my esteemed panelists.
Absolutely. So it is an ecosystem approach. Everyone has a responsibility, and even as consumers, we also do have a responsibility. But sometimes, we cannot. It is not okay to put all of the blame or all of the responsibility on the consumer to be able to protect themselves. Sometimes, no matter how hard we try, or even our own experience of an understanding of digital financial services, there will be gaps and vulnerabilities, and it's really important that the whole ecosystem comes together. And I think associations play a really wonderful bridging role to understand industry view and consumer views and bring them to the regulator, so that the regulator is also able to be informed. It's really hard. I can't imagine how tricky it is being a regulator in these particular times where there are so many priorities and so many challenges, and things are advancing at such a quick and critical state. What was a fraud, as we've heard from all of you, what was a fraud yesterday might not be tomorrow's approach. So it's really important that we all as an industry stay up to date, and by reading each other's research, by using things like the scam radar that in FAB in Botswana have set up, by being part of coalitions and conversations, it helps us all really to shape our thinking, and bring action. And that's as a way to wrap up, really. We've got a couple of minutes left. We've got 4 minutes left. So each of you have about 45 seconds to sort of inspire the audience. So if everyone who's listening, kind of what one key thing can perhaps they take away or act upon to try and help tackle this big challenge affecting such a large percentage of the consumers. We started with you, Eric, so I'm going to start with you.
All right.
You're in the hot seat.
I'll say a few words. So just, again, as you've understood, I really cherish this ecosystem approach. And the way we describe it is we think that everybody has a role to play, as you've said. That's correct. And what we need, in our opinion, is, more emphasis on customers, more customer centricity, much more collaboration among all these, stakeholders in the digital finance ecosystems. And we also need to build, more capabilities of fintech associations, of consumers, of regulators, of all the actors. So I think we need all these to succeed.
I think we're all frantically nodding away because we agree. But William, I'll come to you next.
Sure. Yeah, +1 to everything that Eric has said, but let me just add, I've said this before, but we know that addressing fraud is a really tricky thing to do, and good ideas aren't always effective. So it's really important to test out solutions before scaling them. Research is critical. Come to IPA. We love to do research. And number 2, if I can sneak a second one in, we really need to embrace technology. The technology is being embraced by fraudsters. We need to do the same. Let's fight fire with fire.
Great. And we're looking forward to reading about those new 10 countries that you're going to be tackling next year. Brooke, over to you. You've been nodding away, so I know you're in agreement with the others. What else can you suggest?
I just would say continue to center the consumer, especially those most vulnerable, especially as that definition evolves in this context specifically, and to overcome the silos and questions of responsibility across the scams kill chain, as it were, where scams occur across platforms, across borders. We simply must work together in the interest of the consumer, and in a way that is more future-proof. We're still, in many ways, playing catch-up, and we need to be getting ahead. And we can look to the guidelines for consumer protection to do so, and center that when we talk about customer centricity.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, let's get out of firefighting mode and get into prevention mode. I think that's a great thing. And lastly, Tavonga. So, it is great that we're already seeing the ecosystem in Botswana coming together via, the leadership of the Fintech Association to have these conversations. What else can you add to the recommendations made so far? We lost Tavonga just at the wrong moment. It seems as though we have. It seems like connectivity. Oh, he's back. Tavonga, are you with us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Awesome.
Yes, I was saying, I think in order to be able to solve for this problem, we need to be able to move with speed, and we need to be able to do approaches that allow for ecosystem collaborations in order for us to be able to solve this, because the people we're dealing with are, really smart, they're really aggressive, and we should never make the mistake of underestimating them. As a result, it becomes very critical for us to work together to make sure that we can be able to stop them. Thank you.
Well, I think that's a lovely note for us to end. Thank you so much, panelists, Brooke, William, Eric, Tavonga. I think we've worked well as a collaboration today, and I really hope that we can continue to work together as different organizations fighting this battle to protect our consumers and to make sure that we defend them against scams and fraud. Thank you all to everyone who's listened today. I hope you've had a great day with us, and we look forward to seeing you all and collaborating with you at some point in the future. Thank you so much, everybody, and goodbye.